All right, as folks are filtering in from the waiting room, I invite you to go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. And I would like to welcome to our third part of Advocacy Camp, my co-presenter and also our fabulous program sponsor, Julie from Museum-tastic. Julie, would you like to introduce yourself?
I was just going to do that in the chat, but why not do it in person? So good morning, everybody. My name is Julie Arison Bishop. I am the founder of Museum-tastic. We are a small consulting firm that supports small projects in museums, historic sites, and nonprofits. So everything ranging from marketing and PR, a little bit of that we'll be talking about today, to like collection support, project management, kind of whatever you need. I have about 15 years of experience in the field, and even though I'm not directly full-time employed in the field right now, I look forward to continuing to work with museums and support, of course, the New England Museum Association.
Thanks, Julie. And for folks who may not know me, and apologies to people who heard me say this an hour ago, I'm Meg Winnicates, Director of Engagement for the New England Museum Association. I'm thrilled to see folks here today to talk about advocacy with me. And we are going to be doing our deeper dive into thinking about techniques specifically for how to use social media for advocacy today. So great to see everybody here. And Scarlett, would you like to get us started off with a land acknowledgement?
Yeah, of course. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Virtual spaces cannot replace the lands that sustain and empower us. I'm at home in Worcester, Massachusetts, homelands of the Nipmuc Nation people and their allied tribes, past and present. NEMA recognizes that our organization, along with those of our members, were founded within a colonizing society, which continues the exclusions and erasures of many Indigenous peoples throughout New England and beyond. So you can use the Indigenous Peoples Land Map. I'm going to drop the link in the chat. Give me one quick second. And you can find the lands where you're zooming in from or where your museum is located. Thanks for joining us. And thank you, Julie, for sponsoring us.
Thanks very much, Scarlett. All right. So for folks who were in part of the Introduction to Museums Advocacy yesterday morning, this is going to look like a familiar slide, but I wanted to go over it again since we do have some new folks joining us today. And it's particularly relevant for our discussion today because thinking about advocacy is part of the sort of sliding scale of interaction that we are already on as museum professionals in interacting with the general public and with our governmental officials. So social media can be used for all of the things on this chart, as with any of our communication tools. And so the most basic things that you are probably already doing with the social media at your organization is public relations, where you're letting people know who you are, what you're doing. Hi, we exist. Come to our programs. You're probably doing some more in-depth education through some of your social media, whether it's maybe not as much on Twitter, maybe you're doing more of that, say, through featuring objects on Instagram and talking a little bit about what's in your collection, etc. So we've got let people know you exist, teach them about something related to your mission. Advocacy is the next step beyond that. Advocacy is the kind of education where you're specifically talking about how your organization and your mission interacts with the wider world, particularly civic life and specific causes. So this thing is happening in the world, and this is how it impacts us, and this is why it's important. So advocacy is just very specialized, targeted kind of education language. The thing that makes a lot of people nervous when you work at a nonprofit is that they worry about verging into lobbying. And I'm here to remind you that Hollywood makes lobbying look really terrifying and evil, and perhaps you've even had some real life experiences with people who are less than entirely ethical. Lobbying, however, is not an unethical thing in and of itself. Lobbying is just the act of asking your government officials to take a specific action that benefits your community organization. Please support this bill. Please vote for it. Please sign on as a co-sponsor, et cetera, or please vote against this bill because it's directly going to harm us because of X, Y, Z. You cannot get in trouble for lobbying if you are doing it only as like the tiniest scrap of what you were doing, particularly as an individual. So you as an individual can write to your congressperson at any point to say, this is terrible, please vote against it, or this is really important, please vote for it, et cetera. If as part of your job, The rules vary a little bit from state to state, but if as part of a job you are spending less than 10% of your time in direct contact with your government officials, then you do not have to worry about like registering as a lobbyist, et cetera. Organizations, so if you're tweeting from your organizational account instead of your individual account, organizations can only talk about causes, not people. You have to stay nonpartisan. You can say, this cause is important. This is how it affects us. You can say, this is what the current candidates in this election say about this topic, but you cannot then take the final step to say, and therefore we think you should support candidate X. That's like the thing you are not allowed to talk about. Talk about issues till the cows come home. Don't talk about people. That's like the golden rule when you're talking about advocacy from an organizational standpoint. You can talk to people. You can say, hey, at Senator so-and-so, thank you so much for visiting our organization yesterday and promising your support for XYZ. That is totally a kosher thing you can say on your social media account. You just can't say, and we hope all of our members will vote for you in the next election. That part is the no-no. So we're here talking about this because, of course, in the post-COVID world, a lot of our contact has gone virtual. Virtual contact is still contact even in the realm of advocacy. So using social media, attending virtual town halls and listening sessions, reading your congressional newsletters and getting on the mailing lists of the people who represent you, totally valid and important. Getting them on your newsletters so that they know what's happening with you, also valid and important. And of course, email and phone and virtual meetings are all still ways that are really important ways to connect with your elected officials and their staff. So at this point, since we're focusing specifically on social media instead of all those other forms of virtual contact, many of the rules that we're going to be talking about apply to those methods of virtual contact as well, but we're focusing specifically today on ways to be using social media. So I'm going to hand it over to Julie.
So we're going to go through and talk about some of the steps you could take to kind of plan out your social media presence around Museum Advocacy Day and, of course, New England Museums Week that comes up in March, which is a little bit more of a hyper-local to your state or your locality of where you want to be, but our plan still applies to both areas too. So not necessarily going in order of the questions, but of course, kind of when does this need to happen? Museums Advocacy Day is, of course, February 28th to March 1st. So if you take some of these action steps that we're going to be talking about today and start getting some social posts going even next week prior to Museums Advocacy Day, that would be fantastic. We'll talk about some of the kind of tactics to go into that for like a specific tweet out to a legislator. But even think about, if you're Massachusetts based, at Ed Markey, will we see you for Museums Advocacy Day? Something as simple as that could be really effective and a great way to get people engaged. So thinking about the when for kind of the national day, and then also thinking about the when in March for New England Museum Week as well. You'll certainly want to get involved around that time period. And it's always a good time to engage while we're really talking about kind of advocacy and especially for the case of Museums Advocacy Day. It's never a bad thing to, tweet out a thank you, or if a legislator visits your historic site or museum, to make sure if you have the opportunity to grab a picture with them in front of something special or in front of a building and just, thank you so much to Elizabeth Warren for visiting the House of the Seven Gables today. It's a really great opportunity to, build up a little bit of online presence, get some engagement, and, certainly say thank you. And it's really nice to make sure that you're balancing out an ask with some gratitude as well. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And I would also suggest that if you do happen to have a social media calendar or a planning tool that you're using, put in a monthly kind of ping out to your legislators or a monthly hashtag or something along those lines for advocacy. And again, with a healthy balance of both asking for support and thanking for support is a really good way that you could kind of keep this top of mind throughout the entire year, not just necessarily around Advocacy Day. And what do you want to happen? I'd love to use the chat a little bit if, you have some goals in mind of what you would like to see out of Museums Advocacy Day, either for your state, your museum, your historic site, your locality. Last year, the CARES Act was a big focus for all of us. and asking for support around that funding and a lot of other COVID relief funding. That was the obvious ask, but does anybody have anything in the chat with what they want to ask for this year? Seeing nothing immediate. Sounds like we'll be looking for some inspiration, but some things that you might want to think about too is, reaching out to support NEH funding. I'm sure Meg and both, at the New England level and our AAM colleagues will, yep, there you go, continue relief funding and also some further support for charitable donations. I was just going to say, I'm sure there's an agenda that we'll be asking for. So as you see that agenda and as it becomes available, thinking about tailoring those messages to your needs and, thinking about, and if we can go to the next slide, how you can make that happen. Social media is really an excellent tool for the how to make that happen. Can I click to the next slide? No worries. Thank you. So knowing your platforms and knowing your voice on these platforms and knowing who is on these platforms is really important. If you are the person who manages social media in your organization, consider not just where your audience is, but where they are interacting. In some organizations I've worked for, we've had a LinkedIn page, and on our LinkedIn page, maybe we got 3 or 4 people to like something, 1 person to comment. But on our Instagram page, we would have 600 people who liked something and 60 comments. So you really want to think about where your audience is most engaged with the work that you're doing and being creative in your voice of using that audience where they're interacting. I also want you to keep in mind that in order to get engagement, you need to give engagement. So if you do have people who are commenting on a post, or if you have a legislator who retweets something, you want to hop right into that immediately and just, say, thank you to Jeb Bradley for, sharing information about Remick Farm and Museum. You want to make sure that you kind of are able to engage with these people in a back and forth conversation, just in the same way you would if you were at their historic sighting, you ran into one of these people. You kind of want to have that similar conversational tone. But it's also really nice that if you do put some posts up over the next week and you get community members who also say, we support this, what else can we do? Have a little action plan in place to say, hey, if you could email Jeb Bradley and ask for continued support for this local funding, go ahead and do that. Have some of those in your back pocket ready to go. And again, use social media as a conversation, not just a place to kind of put your word out into the atmosphere. You also want to make sure that you follow what your audiences are talking about and follow what your legislators are passionate about as well. Hashtags are a really great way to do this. And sites that really use hashtags are Twitter, LinkedIn, of course, Instagram, and even a little bit on Facebook too. And you can get an idea of topics that are trending. You can get an idea of hashtags that are popular. Make sure that you as the social media person are also following these so that you could be engaged with what's happening around the museum field or around what your legislators are passionate about. And if you see, for example, one of your legislators is really tied into environmental causes, think about some messaging as to how you might be able to tie into that environmental cause. If you are if you are the Museum of Science, you are on a waterfront location that's going to be affected by climate change, and you know that a particular legislator is really engaged with climate change, take it as an opportunity to maybe share a blog post, tweet out to that person, get them engaged with climate change and the work your museum is doing around that topic. Could be really helpful. And it's also thinking about what gets people's attention. Again, it's not necessary. I don't want to pretend that everybody knows everything about social media. So a really kind of 101 thing to know is that images not only get people's attention, but as you may or may not know, social media works on a whole variety of algorithms. And if you are like me and a history person and not a math person, I don't want to think about the algorithm. I don't want to think about the math behind it. But I know that the math happens behind there. And if people are seeing an image and engaging with your post, it helps that post to stay up and to stay relevant on all social media platforms that applies. What could be even more engaging is the use of video and short video content. And short videos are really easy to create. So many of us have smartphones with amazing cameras, great sound, easy ways to put together 1 minute soundbite, 1 minute clips, and things that you could really use to engage online. So again, thinking about that messaging a little bit ahead of time, knowing your platforms, and then lastly, thinking about your voice on those platforms. Twitter, I always kind of keep the KISS acronym in mind. Keep it simple, sweetheart. You've got 140 characters is your best practice. You can go up to 280 characters, but it may not get the same engagement. Keeping that message short and sweet, tagging who you want to talk to, using 2 to 3 hashtags to keep that in people's feeds is wonderful. Facebook, you could post a little bit longer form. You can go out for kind of the first 200 characters will stay what I'm going to call kind of above the fold. So if you are scrolling through like a Facebook feed and you think about how that looks, you might see about the first 200 characters, give or take. So thinking about getting your most important message at the top of your Facebook. Instagram, visual, visual, visual. You definitely want to make sure that you're keeping the best visuals you've got out there possible. Keeping a more casual tone is also really helpful on Instagram, and using hashtags all over the place to help build up engagement and to help people get in line with your message is really helpful. And lastly, LinkedIn, maybe not as helpful on Advocacy Day, but certainly a tool to keep in mind. And it's a really great way, again, to show off the expertise of your historic site, the expertise of your staff, show what you're good at, using some of those hashtags to build engagement in other ways. But one of the stats that Meg shared with me is that the best way to get in touch with your legislator on social media is to use Twitter. All of your legislators are on Twitter, and though they may not be the managers of it, their staff are. And who has the ear of your legislators? Their staff. So certainly a great way to stay engaged there. So Meg, I think we're good to go to the next slide.
Sounds good. I just wanted to mention, since we didn't cover it, when you were talking about tone and things like that, that is super helpful because different kinds of platforms attract engagement with posts of different kinds of tone. So I've got them listed on the slide here in order of how useful they are for contacting legislators. And it pretty much stops after Instagram unless you're directly trying to reach out to, say, AOC, because she and her staff are on TikTok. Not too many others are. But TikTok and Tumblr are really useful for things when you're trying to talk about like a humorous way to get a message across to for a more general public awareness kind of campaign. So we've got a TikTok slide here from a living history museum that's doing a whole thing about women's rights and equality. So those kinds of things, depending on what kind of messaging you're trying to do, because we're mostly talking to your elected officials today, but public awareness on social media, voter education, voter registration efforts, all of those are also advocacy. And more humorous, quirky platforms like TikTok and Tumblr can be really useful for that kind of thing. Tumblr follows a lot of the same rules as Instagram in terms of like casual tone and heavy on the visuals for people who are less familiar with that. Not to jump on your slide there, Julie.
No, all good. The more we can share, the better, for sure. And again, so just going back to that idea of kind of what is your tweet's job, again, I think this is the job of any of your social posts, but if you really want to get impactful for Advocacy Day, and again, thinking that this is where your legislators are, this is where they're responding, this is where they're interacting, and the goal of Advocacy Day is, of course, getting your legislators listening to the messages you want them to listen to, is to really think about what the job of your tweet is. And of course, you want to share information. And when we're thinking information, this is where we're thinking about the facts. And you could say something along the lines of, thank you for supporting the CARES Act. We were able to keep 20 people employed at our museum because of this. Or we were able to use NEH CARES Act funding to support a major archives project that never would have gotten done. We conserved X amount of objects. Because of this funding from Mass Humanities or Main Humanities, we were able to support putting a new roof on our building. something along those lines, using those facts, using that information to get out there. Tweets can also, in 140 characters, you can evoke emotion. And this is a really good opportunity to talk about either who you want to help or who you do help, or where is there a gap and what can't you accomplish because you don't have X. And evoking some of those feelings of need can be done in there as well. And then finally, using it as a call to action is a really great way to think about Twitter as well. Sign up, learn, visit. Using those action words right up at the top of your tweet is a really great way, again, to kind of engage and tweet as well. So you can think about how you want to plan out your advocacy day tone and how you want to plan out your messaging. And maybe doing a combination of all of these is great, or maybe separating them out and saying, I'm going to do this one to share some information. I'm going to do this one because I really want to talk about these great kids programs we put together. And I really want to encourage this person to visit my historic site or visit my museum. So you can think about a variety of ways to use these together.
All right. And thinking about who you're talking to when you're doing your social media planning is really important, because obviously sort of everybody might see it, but who specifically are you trying to talk to? So when you're talking specifically about social media and advocacy, the people you're most talking to are the people who really care about your organization, people who really care about a cause that intersects with your organization, or your elected representatives and other public officials. So, yeah, we've got this funnel here where there's kind of a broad swath of the general public who might see it, might rebroadcast it, but the further down the funnel you get, the more impact you have in terms of people engaging with your content and rebroadcasting it back out again. So the people you're trying to talk to are the ones who are already, at least generally, your friends and fans and followers, because they're the ones who are most likely to see it. And you're trying to use your tweets to get them to move up the ladder to, say, being a loyalist or an advocate for you, who are going to turn around and say, oh, that's a really cool tweet that somebody just sent to Ed Markey's office. And I really care about the fact that my favorite children's museum is going to flood because of climate change. So I'm going to retweet this and send it to, all of my friends and networks. So thinking about who you're reaching out to, that kind of audience research is super important. So like Julie said, looking at hashtags that have to do with the causes you're talking about, thinking about what kinds of language people are already using online to talk about some of these things. That's all really helpful. And when you're specifically thinking about talking to your elected representatives, that's where that research, just a little bit of it, can make a huge difference in the amount of your impact. So taking a little time to look at their social media feeds, what are they talking about? What do they care about? Look up whatever their web page is for their office at whatever level of government you're talking about. Find out what their committee assignments are, because if you're asking them to comment on or support something that's like in a committee that they're not on and it hasn't come out of committee yet, that's not a timely ask. If this thing ever makes it out of committee, please consider supporting it, is like not wildly impactful. But if you have somebody who is sitting on a committee that is currently considering that bill, that's really the time to reach out to them directly. Also, obviously, think about where they fit on the political spectrum and, what things they may have said about similar topics in the past, and having a look at what their policy interests in the bills they've already co-sponsored are. That kind of thing can all give you some information on how to frame your ask so that their interests and your interests are overlapping in a way that will get their attention. People who heard me say this yesterday, this is going to sound really familiar, but I was talking at one point to a Massachusetts state representative whose two big interests are Little League and small businesses. And when I came in here and said, hi, I'm representing museums, he was literally looking out the window. And when I started talking about how a lot of people hear the word museum, and especially in Boston, they're thinking things like the MFA and the Museum of Science and the aquarium, but people don't necessarily realize that the vast majority of museums are actually small businesses. He literally sat up in his chair, stopped looking at the window, and paid attention to me. So just thinking about who you're talking to and making sure that you let them know contextually, you should be paying attention to this because, you know, we're more in sync than you think we are. That can be really helpful. It works in person and it also works online. Over to you, Julie.
So, and again, tying into that idea of not only do you want to find out kind of what can evoke emotion from that legislator, you also want to dig up your convincing data. And, you know, happily, we are in a field where facts matter quite a bit. Facts matter in what we share kind of interpretively in our daily life with our visitors who might be coming, you know, either into our museum or into our virtual spaces. The data matters in terms of what we share too. So luckily, we're kind of already in a field where this shouldn't feel like a huge lift. And there are some really great resources. And Meg, we are sharing these slides afterwards, right? Perfect. So you can click on some of these links and check out some of these data pieces to work with. You know, of course, kind of at the big level and an umbrella level, looking at NEMA or AAM's advocacy resources to learn about what the ask is, what the big data is around it. Also thinking about news coverage that either might be happening in your area or might be happening at the state level, even might be happening at the national level too, of, you know, something just silly I would think of off the top of my head, and I don't know if people heard about this, but I'm thinking of the story that came out from Russia last week where the security guard drew on the Three Fingers painting and drew little faces using a ballpoint pen of something of, wouldn't it be nice if we had more funding for staffing so things like this didn't happen? And, you know, thinking about, you know, how could you tie in big stories? How can you tie in small stories into what you want for advocacy? And I think too, this is really, really, really important, is to talk to your staff. And this gets exponentially harder sometimes if you have a bigger staff. This can be more difficult if cross-departmentally there's not always a great level of communication. But, you know, if you received CARES Act funding that supported a collections project last year, can you grab 5 minutes with your curator, with your collections manager to say, okay, give me 5 quick facts about what we did here. Did we conserve 5 frames? Were we able to put our collections out? How many of our collections items went online? A couple other things that, again, you could tweet out and just say, you know, thanks to NEH CARES Act funding, here's what we did, boom, 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 in bullet points. Can you talk to conservators if you're from a larger museum and think about what they were able to conserve, and not only the what, but why that matters? What piece of history was saved? What story can art continue to tell? How can that continue to impact what's going on? If you are a historic site, was there funding for your preservation efforts that happened that you can share some of that story too? And again, tying it into big news right now, were you able to do something for some climate change mitigation? Were you able to change HVAC systems? Were you able to make some kind of an impact on the long-term preservation of your site? Talk to the folks who do outreach and engagement. You know, if all of your school programs went virtual last year, how many kids were you able to serve in a virtual space, and how many kids were still able to attend education programs because of this? Or how many people were you able to engage through virtual public programs, and where were all of those people too? You know, again, I think for a lot of us, those virtual visitors remained local. But I think it's really great that, you know, so many of us, you know, regardless of if you are a museum in New Hampshire and you have people from Utah signing up for your programs that never would have come, that's a really neat story to tell, and to kind of talk a little bit about how this funding, CARES Act funding specifically, was really able to support the work you were doing and why we need more of it kind of coming forward. And I think we can go to our next one after this, which is, again, thinking about prepping out those messages. And again, you could take as much time or as little time as you need to, but as Meg suggested, doing a little bit of digging and a little bit of preparation first is going to be really helpful to, in turn, let you share those snappy facts, those quick calls to action. So again, thinking of that accuracy factor. We don't really need to preach this to our museum colleagues too much, but the facts are so important here, because if somebody is resharing that information or resharing that impact, you want it to be right. So gathering up those facts and sharing those facts is important, working with your team to gather those facts. And of course, again, this is an area too where that sharing comes in of you want to make sure that you're talking about your success and showing gratitude. Well, at the same time, you also want to have a balance of sharing, here is my challenge and here's what I'm asking you to do to support this challenge. It's really important to have a nice balance between those two messages and not just always, even thinking in the development mindset, you can't just ask. You need to give a little bit too. You need to show some of your own needs and emotions through that as well. You also want to be timely. Again, thinking about when people are paying attention to what's going on. When are your legislators paying attention to what's going on? Sending out a tweet at 1 o'clock in the morning to Ed Markey. Again, maybe he's a night owl and I'm wrong on this, but thinking about when somebody might be paying attention or when their staffs might be paying attention, using your social media tools to see when and where people are engaging with the content that you're putting out there. If you use a hosting platform like Hootsuite or Lately or Loomly, if you use one of those tools, you can get that information quick. But if not, there's quite a bit you can grab easy from your kind of native social platform. So make sure you're posting this out when you have the most likely chances for engagement. Do things that are memorable. Create, maybe this is the first time this picture from the archives has ever come out online. Maybe this is a really great picture of somebody at a naturalization ceremony at Faneuil Hall. Just thinking about imagery and messaging that can be memorable. And again, I think of Meg's Venn diagram in that too, of what's going to be memorable to your legislator, or what might have been memorable in that in-person conversation to the guy who cared about Little League and small business. He might have now turned into a lifelong advocate for museums and their community as small businesses. So think about what you could do to be memorable. And of course, just thinking of the emotion, showing, again, I think for like the House of the Seven Gables, I think of a naturalization ceremony, and I can think of some of those images that we shared throughout the years of people crying tears of joy because they just got their citizenship papers. Share those feelings, share what people are going to connect with in terms of imagery. And of course, again, that actionable, thinking about those call to action words you could use: see, learn, do, making that a part of your messaging as well. And then finally, what's unique to your institution? What is your superlative? What are you the best at? What are you most unique for? What really stands out? And it's kind of a good opportunity. And I especially like this one too, because the burnout is real over the past 2 years, and that's a whole other webinar to get into. But thinking of some of the positives of your organization, thinking about what you're the best at and what you're good at, and kind of putting that out there into the wider world. It's also a little bit helpful for, you as a staff person to be able to kind of share those posts and get that positive feedback as well. And then I think our next slide is just about, kind of leveling up. And, using this one, like we talked about with hashtags, doing a little bit of that research at the front end of it not only sets you up well for Advocacy Day, but can really help with your social media and virtual planning overall, of that engagement overall. Using those images and where you have more characters to use, thinking about those descriptions of the images. And of course, the descriptions and using alt text are also really helpful for becoming a more universally accessible institution as well. So making sure that you have that out there at all possible times that you can. If you have a marketing and design team, if you're a larger museum, or you just happen to be a smaller museum with staff with those kind of talent, skills, and abilities, working with your marketing and design team to create some compelling imagery, and whether that's infographics, illustrated quotes, animated social posts, whatever it is, great tool to use. If you're a smaller museum, if you're a one-person executive director, marketing person, development person, whatever the case might be, and you haven't signed up for a free nonprofit Canva account yet, Canva, please go and sign up for that. It is an incredibly easy to use social media tool. You can pull all of your kind of organization's brand into there with everything from logos to colors to fonts. And you can really work with it to create some very, very easy to use, compelling infographics, animated GIFs, short videos. The video feature on it is amazing. And it's really a kind of one-stop shop tool. Again, free for nonprofit. So if you need it, you're crazy not to use it. But it really can help you create some great branded content that also provides these quick, snappy, not snippy. We don't want that. Quick, snappy pieces of information out there. Also thinking about too, are there pieces you can repurpose? Do you have a really long, live demonstration that you did, or did you show animal care at your site, or did you do something fun with kids where you have an option to use this video? Can you take a clip from that video and talk about, just this person who talks about needing to feed the pigs at their historic farm every day? Or can you take a couple of short interview clips, from children who might have been a part of a engaging educational program that you did? Are there things you could use that you could shorten up, make it quick, make it snappy, put it online? And again, the tools that are out there nowadays make this, you don't need a professional videographer, although they certainly serve their purpose and their point. And when you're doing nice things, it's a great thing to have. But if you're just looking for some short, quick social media fodder, using these great tools that are out there to make it easy is certainly helpful. And then kind of showing all of this in action, we did a lot at the House of the Seven Gables last year with kind of our team. And a lot of this was just putting this into action. And this is prior to, some of that bigger funding coming into place, but we wanted to share a great image and share something from our archives. People love seeing Caroline Emerton, who's the founder of the House of the Seven Gables. They love seeing kind of her stuff being put out there. This, I believe, was also coming in around Women's History Month. I don't think we did this for Advocacy Day. Yeah, this was, New England Museum Week when we did this. So this was March. So we wanted to touch on that Women's History Month. We used, TBT, Throwback Thursday, as a way to gather even more engagement around this, and hashtag SalemMA, using those popular tweets, but popular hashtags. But we also wanted to make sure we were using topical hashtags as well, because again, while Museum Advocate every single day might not be a trending tweet, here's hoping February 28th to March 1st, this will be a trending tweet and something to be a part of. And again, this was something that we had used on Twitter. This is over the 140 characters. This is more pushing the 280 on this one. Writing short is really hard work. Anybody who does a lot of work on Twitter, this. If you've ever, I'm sure some of you are on here who wrote like an Arcadia book, that you could write for years and days about your community or your organization, and boiling those things down into 25 or 50 words is difficult, even more difficult to write in 140. But also a lovely exercise for you to do too, to say, can I get my message out in a short form that's going to grab people right away? And again, we did a lot of these tweets around both kind of regular Advocacy Day last year and did them around New England Museum Week. And the goal of these was kind of to, I'm going to say, hide the vegetables a little bit too. We still wanted our regular followers to engage with these tweets, maybe to find out what a museum advocate is and to see what's going on. And we wanted to lobby without feeling like we were lobbying too. So that was kind of the goal of a lot of kind of the messaging that we did with this, suite of social media posting around this time, was to engage our regular followers, hopefully engage some of our legislators, and just, actively be a part of the work that NEMA and AAM are doing around this topic.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Julie. And thank you for letting me, use you as an example, because I was very tickled by a lot of the posting that you did with House of Seven Gables last year. So, all right, thinking about measuring impact, because that's, of course, one of the things that people always want to know about, like, is it worth spending all the time on social media? Who sees it? Who cares? Is it, etc. And so when you're doing social media advocacy, you have to decide which are the metrics you actually care about. So if you're tweeting directly at an official account, oftentimes they will like or retweet it, especially if you're saying something complimentary. So is that, like, can you call that success? They saw it, they know we exist. That's now an open avenue of conversation. So, they'll maybe remember we said something nice about them the next time we want their attention. Do you care about more general engagement from your followers, shares and retweets, likes or comments? And of course, recognizing that you need to adjust your expectations on engagement based on what platform you're talking about, right? Instagram is famous for having a lot more engagement than Twitter. Facebook kind of varies. Are you trying to measure like click-through links if you're putting something in like find out more information about, or, you know, visit our online exhibition? Because are you actually on a wider like range of things? If you're talking about an advocacy kind of platform where you're raising attention for a cause, are you interested in trying to track to see if there's a click-through in terms of donations raised or attendees registered, which are some of the more usual kinds of metrics? If you're talking about trying to do an entire social media awareness campaign, the way, for instance, I track what happens with New England Museum Week and things like that, there are all of the built-in tools from the various platforms you're using. So most of the platforms, like Julie was saying, have some analytics built in that will help give you insight into what are good times of day to post, or when did your tweet or whatever get the most views, when was there the most traction for your blog post or whatever. If you're trying to measure the performance of a particular hashtag where you're tracking whether or not people are using it, whether it's spreading, is it being retweeted, etc. There's a platform called Keyhole that tracks hashtags. So you can just do like a free search and it will give you like a week's worth of information around who used that, you know, kind of how often was that hashtag used. That's the kind of thing that I use and other people who are running advocacy awareness campaigns will do in order to try to find out what, like, how many impressions did we get? How many people actually saw things associated with this hashtag, etc. And you can also use some of the tools on Google Analytics. So again, this is the kind of thing where that's getting pretty nerdy, but sometimes people really want you to be able to point to, there was an impact from this. And there are tools out there to help you measure things like how many people watched this video or et cetera, where it will do the counting for you. And you don't necessarily have to go through and count it all up by yourself. How many unique users were using this hashtag in this period? And then just as a reminder, because obviously initial impressions on social media aside, advocacy is a slow process. Social media is fast, advocacy is slow. They are not like an automatic perfect partnership because people expect more immediate results from social media than you necessarily get. Social media is just one of the building blocks for a larger part of advocacy. So it is about building relationships. It's about making sure that you continue to follow your elected officials' accounts and respond to things that they are also posting, either as an individual or from your organizational account as you deem appropriate. As Julie has said many times, thank yous are great. They're very effective. And social media can be another avenue to be able to invite people for further connection, invite them for visits, etc. Take pictures when they arrive and post them up and say thank you for a great time, etc. So there's a certain level of reciprocity in building an advocacy relationship that can be supported by your social media use, but you can't really rely on social media alone to do that. It does take time to see the results.
I'm going to, Meg, just to give you a quick idea of this too, is I believe like the average, and I don't have the exact figures in front of me, but I think like the average lifespan of a tweet is something like 18 minutes. The average lifetime of a Facebook or LinkedIn post, I believe, is something around like 16 to 18 hours. And the average lifespan of an Instagram post is about 24 hours. So just when you kind of said like social media is fast, that is correct. And it doesn't mean that like the tweet goes away in 17 minutes, but it means that if it's not engaged within that time frame, the chances of engagement become less and less. So being willing to kind of get out there a little bit more and share a little bit about that information in a very fast-paced social media world, and using it, like you said too, just as a tool for building, not necessarily the end-all be-all.
All right. And as a reminder, for those of you who haven't heard me say it many times already, New England Museum Week is coming up after Museums Advocacy Day. It is a primarily social media based advocacy awareness campaign on our part. Each state museum coalition gets, a day to focus and celebrate, but New England Museum Week is for everybody the whole time. So don't feel like you have to limit yourself to tweeting on that one day. You can tweet in the run up, you can tweet during the week, you can tweet afterwards to say, hey, we were so excited to make connections with these 3 public officials during New England Museum Week, etc. So again, prepping for something, tweeting throughout it, having follow-up, etc., that also gives you more of a life on social media because things kind of thread together, which can be nice, especially if you're using the hashtags. So yeah, that is our presentation for today. And I am going to just say again, thank you so much, Julie, both for presenting with us and also for being our sponsor today. We really appreciate it. It's been a lot of really good information, and we're now have several minutes left for people to ask any questions. Or Julie, if you got any other helpful pro tips that we haven't covered, feel free to throw those in as well. And if anybody else has some suggestions or experience in this area that you want to share with people, feel free to either unmute yourself or drop it in the chat.
I have a new hashtag. I
love it. Thank you very much, Liz. All right. And we recognize that this can be there's a whole lot going on here. So we will be sharing the slides. This has been recorded. We will send, the links out to folks afterwards, and it will also be posted on the NEMA website in case you want to come back and brush up or be able to share it with any of your colleagues, etc.
If anybody wants to email me with a couple of their tweets or anything that if they feel like I want to get another set of eyes on this before that happens, it's just julie@museumtastic.com, and I'm more than happy to review a couple of your posts before you send them out. I don't mind at all.
That's a great offer. Thank you, Julie.
Thanks, Meg. Thanks,
All right.
NEMA. Thanks, Julie.
Thanks for joining us again, Amris,
Yeah.
and everybody else here. Great to see you. And
yeah, Andy,
everybody
do you
can
want
go
to say
have
hi
lunch
to the
now, I
NEMA
hope.
people? Emma,
I'm sorry.
Andy, say hi to the NEMA people. Are you there still? I just wanted you to meet our communications manager.
Oh,
if
great.
they're still on.
Hello.
Andy.
Yes, I am still on. Hi, I'm CLHO's communication manager. I work with Amris. She's also one of the adjunct professors at Central with me in the grad program, and it's awesome.
Fabulous. Well, we look forward to getting to work with you further. And thank you again for the great emails you've been sending out about Advocacy Camp and New England Museum.
You guys made it easy. You guys made it so easy. You had all those things where it's like, if you want to post on social media, copy paste, download these images. So you made it very easy for us. So I appreciate that a lot.
NEMA crew is pretty amazing.
It makes it easy for organizations who don't have a communications manager. They have someone who posts on social media sometimes. And people who don't go to the trainings like this or don't have experience, and smaller institutions as well. It makes it a lot easier for them, and it gives them a good template to go forward. So I just think it's awesome. Very helpful.
Yeah, and Julie, I'm just so excited to learn about your organization. It seems really great, and I want to. We should talk more about how to get the word out to our members, who are all small Connecticut museums for the most part. I mean, we have some bigger ones, but most of them identify as small and under-resourced. So, but people are always contacting us for recommendations of vendors to work with, and with the Connecticut Cultural Fund grants that have been coming out of the state and Connecticut Humanities. There's some money to go around right now, so I'd love to follow up with you about how we can get your services out to some of our members too.
Awesome. Please be in touch and we can set up a little call together. I'd love that. Thank you.
That'd be great. Yeah, wonderful.
Nice meeting you all.
Nice to meet you
Bye.
too. All right.
Thanks again. Have a great day, everybody.
You too.